worldwide. Its U.S. office was first Berkeley, then Oakland, and one of our premier projects was called Cities for Climate Protection. And so if you're familiar now with every community in Marin, for example, and Sonoma now has climate action plans, greenhouse gas reduction goals. Oakland does, Berkeley does, San Francisco, many cities all across the country and the world. All of that grew out of that project, Cities for Climate Protection. And I raised that. It's still going. It's not as staffed as it was, but partly the recession affected all nonprofits. So nonprofits were really hit by funding, but the activity by cities is still alive and well. There's some things that the state can do in relationship to sustainable communities, but the state's role is a little bit less. In this regard, it's really the locality's role. And I say that, well, because you all can influence the localities. You can influence the state too, but the state's slightly harder, only because, the people that talk to us most are people who, but you can affect the localities. And right now, the fact that there is growing bicycle lanes, for example, in Oakland, that there's even, when I was in the Berkeley City Council, I served from 84 to 92. In 1990, I decided that my focus for the following 2 years, and I knew that it was going to be my end, I wasn't going to continue, was to get Berkeley to be a bicycle-friendly city. Because we're a flat city except for the hills, and the majority of our population lives in the flats. And you look at Davis, you look at lots of other communities, Palo Alto, and the percent of trips made by bicycle far exceeds Berkeley. Why? So we did a survey, very informal, but just cruised around the town. It was what was then Urban Ecology, East Bay Bicycle Coalition, some other groups. We basically talked to people. Do you have a bike? Yes. What do you use it for? Oh, only on the trails. Why? They're afraid. They're scared of cars. And so we thought, we have to make Berkeley a bicycle-friendly city. So we, put into place the beginning of all the bicycle boulevards. But, we're still, I'm not saying it is. I'm glad it's begun, but, we ain't where we should be, right? I mean, given that we had in mind back in 90 and it's 2012, we're not very far. But the reason we're as far as we are is because of resident pressure. And because the creation of Bicycle Friendly Berkeley and other bike advocacy groups. Now, we're going to have a similar thing with the other things we care about. Now I'm going to quickly get into another issue. Sustainable communities are good for a lot of reasons, but I'll give you one of the key reasons: climate change. And if we're focused on sustainable communities from the point of view of climate change, we've got to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. If we want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, we have to understand where they're coming from. And I'm sorry, but right here in the East Bay, they're coming from transportation. Transportation and natural gas. So while solar on your roof is a nice thing, if you haven't done yet full high efficiency or gotten rid of your car, don't put solar on your roof. Because solar on your roof in Oakland or Berkeley or El Cerrito is only going to take care of about that much carbon, because all it does is take care of your electricity. And the carbon in your household is in your natural gas. It's in your heater, your water heater, your furnace, that sort of thing, okay, your stove, and in your transportation. So, how do we get a sustainable community? We got to defy the tendency in Berkeley and other communities for NIMBYs to say, oh, not here, oh, we like our lovely two-story or one-story single-family residence type of ambiance. And there's no appreciation for the richness that density brings. Not only the richness that it brings, but the affordability, or the ability to not have to use a car. So right now, we have, in both cities, too high of requirement of parking spaces for development. A parking space, to add it to a development, is $10,000 to $50,000. That's how much the developer has to put, which is then put on the cost of the housing, making the housing unaffordable. Right? So if we want affordable housing, we want sustainable communities, we want to address climate change, we got to get better density, we got to get out of our cars, and we got to address our natural gas use in our homes and buildings. I'm going to stop now so Andy can talk, and we're going to do a lot of questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Erin.
I walked here. So I do have a Prius.
I walked here as well, and I also have a Prius. water efficiency at East Bay Mud, some opportunities that we have for clean energy and energy efficiency through East Bay Mud, working with your local cities. And join the conversation about smart growth and where we go forward in the East Bay. I think we're here today to talk about progressive opportunities. And there is a major opportunity in the area of sustainable development because we're able to actually create jobs from the practice of implementing policies that encourage sustainability by engaging in jobs for energy efficiency, by engaging in jobs that create renewable energy, by having jobs that encourage water efficiency. Many of these policies help create jobs. I think recycling is another area that we're not focusing on today, but that's a key area where if we enhance sustainability in all of these different policy areas, we can create jobs. And that's and in fact that many of these jobs will be local jobs. You cannot outsource energy efficiency, and we save people money in the process, and that's why this is so important for the vitality of our community. The climate crisis is real. From the perspective of East Bay Mud, where we are in charge of delivering your water, we have that responsibility to you to make sure that you have clean, reliable drinking water 365 days per year. We look at what happens with climate change and the impact that climate change will have on the snowpack. With rising temperatures, that means the snow is going to stay snow much longer. Much shorter. And it's going to get hotter, and that means we're going to have more sudden flood events down the river. That means we're going to have strain on our whole water supply system. And climate change is going to have some very serious impacts for the way we handle water in California, not to mention skiing. So, that's just one reason upon many. I mean, we have rising sea level rise, talk about what happens to the Port of Oakland and to our own wastewater treatment plant, our major infrastructure, our parks that we're planning for the shoreline. All of these important resources are threatened by climate change, not to mention our health. In my daily work, I work on public health, advocating for clean air and clean energy because climate change is going to increase asthma. When we have higher temperatures, that pollution already is. When we have higher temperatures, the chemical ozone is highly sensitive to increased temperatures, and that means that the amount of days that we can go outside and not feel pain and tension in our lungs, literally chemical burning in our lungs, those days are going to multiply 5 or more fold, and that's a very serious issue. So that's why I'm concerned about climate change, and we need to look at all of the different sectors that contribute and look at what can we do. The state level is doing a lot, and I think we're fortunate to live in California, where our state has already passed comprehensive climate legislation, AB 32, and while not perfect, it goes so far in reducing greenhouse gases to 1990 levels by 2020. And I think it's important to look at the opportunity of AB 32 and to see what are the different areas where we're able to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in a way that enhances local community vitality, specifically in green jobs. Looking at that, East Bay Mud has a unique opportunity working with, so far the cities of Berkeley and Richmond have expressed interest in working with East Bay Mud to form a community choice aggregation. That's a new program that's been adopted by the state a long time ago, but only recently has been made available for East Bay Mud to play a role. And the cities are interested in being able to look at the funding streams that go towards energy efficiency and your utility bills, and to have more local choice over where does your electricity come from. The state is headed towards 33% renewable energy by 2020. That is a fantastic, ambitious goal, but we need to go further. The climate crisis is one where future generations really are depending on us to get this right. And if we don't, I think we will really be looked upon unfavorably in history. I think we need to take that responsibility seriously and think about what our current opportunities are to be able to leverage jobs out of the process. So I'm excited in exploring this, and I want to ask for your support and help if you are looking at starting a green business, if you're interested in energy efficiency. What can we do about clean energy? Get involved in the process. There's some other workshops today that are looking at this topic, and so I'd encourage you to get involved and contribute to the process. So what could we do out of this? We could be able to have more local choice over how do we address energy efficiency. I think there's a lot of problems with the way energy efficiency is done in California. Assemblywoman Skinner recognizes this. Introduced a bill that would be more clear that we want our energy efficiency reductions to be real. Too many times we just have some blind rebate programs that aren't really targeted. We have air conditioners being put in homes where the ducts aren't sealed. And I think that this is an area where I've heard from some trade unions as well that the issue of not sealing the ducts is an issue for the sheet metal workers, where the whole home isn't efficient. So we need to move towards a system where all of our programs are shaped towards having a more efficient home, not just having some piecemeal rebate programs here and there. So that's some of the opportunity, and I look forward to discussing that and other issues during Q&A.
So let's open up to a question and answer. If you could please introduce yourself and say what organization you're from, and go ahead and ask away.
Hi, I'm John Curl. I'm the chair of an organization called West Berkeley Artisans and Industrial Companies, WeBake. And when you were in the city council, Nancy, and Lonnie Hancock was mayor, we had a great community mobilization, which we call the West Berkeley Plan, and we zoned West Berkeley to help preserve manufacturing and industries and arts and crafts and jobs for people who do not have advanced degrees. And with smart growth, which is really the dominant philosophy at City Hall and in the Bates administration and in the staff, they have been using this to dismantle the industrial protections and the industrial zone with the idea of regional planning of that manufacturing and artisans and craftspeople can go to Oakland or Richmond, and they're moving residents. To take the industrial zones as a place to put residencies, to take industrial land and change it into either commercial or residencies under the idea of smart growth. And that goes totally against the idea of local sustainable community, because if you do not have manufacturing, you don't have jobs for people without advanced degrees, it's going to be disastrous.
Do you have a question there, or what's?
Well, what do we do? How do we integrate manufacturing into the smart growth philosophy?
I'm not followed. There's always some tensions between residential and industrial type facilities. But I fought very hard, and I'll continue to fight hard, to retain industries like Pacific Steel Casting. Why? Because U.S. cannot afford to lose the ability to make those materials here in this country. Do we want to be dependent on China, wherever, for those materials that we essentially need? Do we want to have times where, traffic or routes are cut off and then we can't have access to steel? And plus, those are very important and good jobs. Plus, there's a huge greenhouse gas emissions reduction if we manufacture our materials here in this country and in this state. So I will continue to be an advocate for that. And I think within the city of Berkeley, it's wiser for us to increase the density in our transit corridors, near the Ashby BART, near the Sacramento BART, near downtown BART. Now I say that, some of you may live over there near the North Berkeley BART station. You'll probably notice that there would be high resistance around the North Berkeley BART station to increase density. but it's the completely appropriate place to do so. And so we have to have that kind of dialogue in our community so that we, there may be more pressure to put development in other areas because there's not as many neighbors to complain about it, right? But we need to increase the density where we have services already and where we have transit.
Yes, sir. What?
Yeah, my name is Aaron Lamer with an organization called Bay Localized, and I want to appreciate you mentioning the need for moving out of our cars and into a much more rich, abundant transit system. And I appreciate you also mentioning the possibility for deeper city cooperation around electrical energy, because I feel like there's actually a nexus there of opportunity in the coming years and decades, right, where we're going to need to create a robust, multimodal, electrified transit system that's going to actually be able to move people and goods around. And I'm wondering, do you see an opportunity there for us to figure out a way to really robustly increase our local generation capacity to be able to provide the necessary load for that long-term necessary expansion of our transit infrastructure so we can address global warming, transit needs, as well as an opportunity, as I say, for local generation of electricity in our region?
We should have a whole workshop just on that, only because there's, what he's referring to is that if we go to either electrified transit, which part already is, but if we go more and we go to EVs, electric vehicles, then we could generate locally. The only flaw in that is if we're plugging everything in at night, we won't be generating locally. And the thing that we do have to be very careful about is really understanding when we move to a new system, what the impacts of that system are. And I think it is right to move towards electric vehicles, but I think it's also right for us to get towards less dependence on the sort of single use of a vehicle, right?
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
I mean, transit.
And, I said I own a Prius, and that kind of really, in effect, I really resisted buying a Prius for forever because, and I don't want anybody here to, it's really far better, regardless of what car you have. Keep the car you have if it runs well, just use it as little as possible. Don't go and, because we don't even know what we're going to do with those batteries in that damn Prius. But, car share is really a great thing that's been advancing. We need more of it. I mentioned bicycles. Certainly bicycles are not practical for every single type of trip we need to make or for, in Netherlands and Germany, you see moms with the, or dads with the whole, set up on the bike and they're carting 2 or 3 kids and they're getting their groceries and everything. We see less of those kinds of bicycle vehicles around here, but, maybe we'll see more of that. But obviously bicycles are not going to replace every trip. But anyway, on the localized thing, I think what Andy's talking about, he can address it, are different communities coming together and doing the aggregate, but that aggregation may be most practical not by dramatically increasing the number of, say, solar PV on residential single-family home rooftops, but rather on commercial properties or on across the BART tracks or on parking lots.
Andy, you want to address that too?
Sure, I agree that we need a whole workshop just on that, and some of this, I encourage you to attend the session on decentralized energy at noon for more on that, but I think we need to do a lot of study just on that and to look at these different issues. It's important to think about what are the objectives of a program. I think some of the objectives are to be able to be a model of sustainability for other regions and to show that we are able to achieve a much stronger level of renewable energy and renewable energy in a way that reduces greenhouse gases, that maximizes energy efficiency, that leverages our local community buying power to create jobs. So having a workshop and sessions just to study different options for designing a portfolio, including an energy efficiency portfolio that could do these things and lay out all the options and see how they evaluate, I think will be there. It's critical to have a planning around our transit nodes and not just to be satisfied with the nodes we already have. We are not able to I think, really have the thriving community we need unless we create a system that's able to sustain ourselves off the BART line a little bit. I think we need to be able to think about what life is like on Telegraph Avenue, in between BART station to BART station, down East 14th, up MacArthur, along San Pablo Avenue. We need to be thinking about our key corridors that should have high quality bus service.
Like bus rapid transit?
Right, we need to be having much more rapid buses, funding the bus rapid transits that are in the TEP and beyond, the transportation expenditure plan that's being proposed. So I think we need to be considering how do we maximize these land use opportunities, encouraging affordable housing in the mix as well. So that's, I think that kind of smart growth planning is what can also help reduce vehicle miles traveled too.
Yes, sir. Ralph?
Al Weinrob with the Local Clean Energy Alliance. So I guess everybody's in agreement. We definitely need to do more studies of all these things. Great. I just wanted to ask a question about, Andy raised a question about energy efficiency, as a key notion of reducing energy demand, because obviously this total consumption gluttony around energy is not really a way of getting to a sustainable future. And Nancy, you've done a lot of work on energy efficiency legislation, but it seems that energy efficiency is still sort of like not really moving much, in any real sense. There's a program now in California called Energy Upgrade California, and it's going to end pretty soon, and it hasn't accomplished that much.
It won't end very soon. It will not end.
Oh, okay, good. Well, I'll give you a chance to get that. But just to finish the question, so a large, most energy efficiency programs have been administered by PG&E, and it probably doesn't take too much imagination to understand that a company that sort of thrives on continued energy growth and expansion of the electrical energy system doesn't have a whole lot of stake, in energy efficiency. And in fact, what the California Public Utilities Commission has been doing has been rewarding PG&E for not achieving, any of the goals. So there's a real problem in terms of energy efficiency locally, sort of breaking this whole kind of monopolized approach to energy efficiency that gets us nowhere. So I wanted to get some sense from both of you about how we could break through this mess to basically take energy efficiency out of the hands of the public utilities and to start instituting programs such as what they've done in Texas, where the state actually buys energy efficiency in the same way that it buys energy through standard offer contracts and stuff like that. So a lot of more inventive, creative kind of thinking about how we can start to really reduce demand.
All right, so quickly for those of you who may be familiar, may not, but California was sort of a pioneer. Well, we've been a pioneer in energy efficiency overall. We've got the best building code in the whole US of A, Title 24. Well, it's the best building code. Germany's and Japan's and all are better. But we also have a good more than 20 years ago, early 80s, we did what is called decoupling, where our Public Utilities Commission basically, if you're an energy company, as Al pointed out, if you're PG&E, your profits are based on it. You got to get, all of us have to be hogs. The more we use, the more they make, the more money they make, the happier they are, right? So what California did was decouple that and allowed them to, in effect, make a profit on more than just our increased demand, but also on achieving certain energy efficiency goals. And we were the first state to do so, and other states have done. And it's one of the reasons, as much as we need to go further, it's one of the reasons that today, California's per capita electricity and natural gas use within the building stock is almost the same as it was in the late 70s. Whereas, across the entire rest of the U.S., it has grown by a minimum of 50% per person to 150%. So, and that was purely due to the whole set of policies, our appliance standards, our building codes, the decoupling, and the PUC, and various other things. All right, so now what do we do today? I've done, if you look at, since I got in the Assembly in 2008, almost all my legislation is around energy and energy efficiency, which I don't, not to say that there's another good work to do, but it's, I'm obsessed. And we need to go further. It's the low-hanging fruit. And as much as we have all these programs in place, I mean, I have a 900 square foot little catalog house in West Berkeley, and it was built in 1913 or 20 or something, lath and plaster, not easy to insulate, not easy, right? So even though just because, you know, I don't use a lot of heat and all, in effect, it's not an efficient house. And all the weather stripping in the world wasn't going to fix that. It, in effect, needs a whole building retrofit. So how do you get whole building retrofits? They're disruptive and they cost money. And right now, with the credit markets the way they are, if you want to try to refi to do it, you can't even get the money from the mortgage or the refi. So we put into place Energy Upgrade California. We got stimulus money, but we now have more. We now have a series of bills that have been passed, and I just introduced another one. And if you go on Energy Upgrade California's site, and the city of Berkeley is helping to administer part of it, buildings of single family and up to four unit residential can get up to $25,000 low interest, long-term loans to do the efficiency upgrades. They have really good contractors listed that can come in, do the audit, do the work and such. Now, that only gets at the single family home and the 4-unit home or whatever. We have a lot of multifamily. We have a lot of commercial. If you look at the real electricity and natural gas use in the state, it's in multifamily and commercial. So Senator De Leon and myself just introduced a new bill with the Controller John Chung to, it's an SP something, I don't even remember the number, sorry. And it's a bond that would enable loans of much larger amounts starting $50,000 and higher to get into our big commercial properties and our multifamily properties. These would be union jobs, good for our building trades, and would really get us the kind of efficiency. Because our building code, that Title 24, went into effect in the mid-'80s. We have over 60% or 70% of our commercial properties were all built pre that, and more than 50% of our residential. So we have to get at with full building retrofits. I also did a bill, AB 758, that gave the Energy Commission and the PUC tools to help motivate, besides the loans, to help motivate these whole building retrofits. City of Berkeley, I patterned it after an ordinance that I put into place in the City of Berkeley in 1979, RICO and SECO, and what they do, and they've been in place all those years. So Berkeley has the highest efficiency square footage of building stock in the entire state, and the reason we do is every time a property changes hands in Berkeley, it has to be upgraded somewhat. Now, the realtors are extraordinarily resistant to requiring time of sale. And so in my bill, I didn't require time of sale. And right now, the realtors, even though I didn't require it, the Energy Commission is trying to look at how to incentivize that, and the realtors have gone crazy, and they put in a new bill, Assemblymember Galgiani, to try to prevent any ability to use time of sale. But we can't prevent any ability. We don't want to use time of sale only, but we can't prevent it, because at certain times that's the optimal, because the property's vacant, and that's the, you can do the real upgrade. So we're going to fight back on that bill, but we have a lot of things going. And I describe it to you because I'm doing the best what I can on my side, but you all need to do it too, and you need to help people understand that really the first place they need to think about is how to increase the efficiency of where they live.
Nancy covered that very, very comprehensively, so I'll just add that one other area that I think we need to make easier the tools for homeowners to be able to do upgrades is to be able to have the financing either on your bill or through your property taxes and on a voluntary basis. And I think that tool would open up a lot of opportunity for homeowners to be able to actually retrofit their homes and not be worried that you're going to make a big investment in your home, and that investment won't be lost when you go to sell your home, which could be an indeterminate amount of years. So that's been a real barrier for getting homeowners to be able to do this. There are some legal barriers doing the PACE program that Berkeley tried to initiate. The national financial organizations, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, have not been very supportive of integrating energy efficiency on your property taxes into the mortgage system. That's a real problem. We need to get through that. We need to find an alternative. Maybe working with government agencies that are able to access those kinds of payment systems opportunity.
Quick follow-up. It seems to me though, Nancy and Andy, that one of the big problems is funding. I mean, you mentioned some
Right,
bills that
that's
are gonna have
why-
funding, but
Yes.
you know, if we're gonna really move to energy efficiency, we have to make it a true incentive for people to do so, don't we? I mean, in a way that we make incentive for oil companies to drill or natural gas companies to drill, you know, or for factory farms to grow. I mean,
Right.
we don't have that built incentive. What
Well,
can we do?
okay, so that, I suppose, not to say that it's yet perfect, it isn't, but that, really, the point of all my legislation since I've got in has been to try to make more directly that incentive and to compensate for the fact that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac kiboshed our PACE program. Now, the PUC, Governor Brown's recent appointees, Mike Florio, who's an Oakland resident, who was affiliated with TURN, the consumer advocacy group, he is a very strong advocate for efficiency, so is Mark Farron. So I think we're going to start to see more, I mean, the PUC has always been pretty good, but there's, the utilities do have an inordinate amount of influence. I think we're going to start to see that balance a little. I think the other thing we're going to see is that we're going to have auction revenues from the cap and trade program where we can direct more. And the good thing about Governor Brown is that his people advising him really understand that efficiency is the place where we're going to get the most bang for our buck. We're going to get the most job creation, we're going to get the most demand drop, and GHG reduction, right? And so he's going to be focused. Right now, the the Air Resources Board has put the cap and trade program into place. There's going to be some billion or $2 billion of auction monies coming in. And what Governor Brown has said is rather than us legislators each doing a bill like, let's fund this, my favorite thing, no, my favorite thing, no, your favorite thing, instead to put the auction monies into the budget, and in the budget direct them so that we could do things like direct them towards a really significant efficiency program. So I'm very optimistic about that. I'm working with the speaker on that and with the governor's office. I'm also going to be introducing a bill. The PUC is going to have some portion of those the auction revenues. And I'm doing a bill that would require them to use maybe 25% of it to upgrade California's educational facilities. All our K-12 schools, community colleges, UCs, and CSUs.
That's it.
Thomas Earthberg, I'm here as an individual, but I've been in energy, climate change, sustainability since 1994 on 3 continents. And this question is really for Andy. When you were talking about CCA opportunities with EB Mud, and I was wondering what are the opportunities for one being decoupled, because EB Mud is not decoupled, and when would we be getting to full costing in terms of water rates, because there's a lot of water that's wasted. And that would, because there's some massive issues on the water side, and climate projections are suggesting that we're looking at climate of Tijuana for the Bay Area by 2050. So,
Just want to point out quickly for the audience, Andy Katz on the EBMUD board has worked hardest, probably of all the board members, to try to charge a lot more for water usage, especially east of the hills. And unfortunately, the east of the hills representatives have blocked that.
So I'll take those, and I think they're separate questions. So it's true both on the energy side, whether it's East Bay Mud or another version of a municipal utility, water or energy, we're decoupled. And the difference is that we're municipally run. I think decoupling is incredibly important for an investor-owned utility because that company, their obligation to their shareholders is to maximize profit. And with a municipal utility, you have more of an obligation to be responsive to the public. And I think to some degree, a regulated monopoly has that responsibility through the oversight from the Public Utilities Commission. But you're going to have more of a democratic process at a municipal utility. Now that democratic process means that when the East of the Hills has an interest in what their water rates are, and I think depends on the board of directors to be able to set rates that will manage our supply best. And where we are at East Bay Glen is we've come a long way, and the water community, I think, has come a long way. Although we remarkably do have one of the most steeply tiered systems in the state. It doesn't go far enough. I think we still have a situation where we have about 3 to 5% of the residential water users using about 25% of our district's water. And a lot of that water use is not in the communities west of the hills, it's in the communities east of the hills. So we need to be encouraging the right water efficiency, making sure that we have rates that encourage conservation and incentives that encourage the conversion of lawns that will use a lot of water and convert that to more drought-resistant landscape. We have a new program in our water conservation master plan that will double our rebate for conversion and pay for taking out lawns and putting in drought-resistant plants on a voluntary basis, and I think that price signal will work. Our overall water supply management plan calls for us increasing conservation by 40 million gallons a day, doubling recycled water, increasing reliance on groundwater storage. We've given direction to remove the expansion of Pardee Reservoir from our water supply management plan. So, thank you. And I feel like we're on track to be sustainable by 2040. Are we doing the most we can? I don't think that we're doing the most we can right now. But I think if you look at the crisis that we're facing, I think we're managing our water supply future in a way where we are not going to be rationing more than 15% during the next 30 years. And we're going to be able to manage our water supply without building a new dam. And so I think those are the objectives, those are the end objectives that we can feel comfortable about. To move beyond that, I think we need to look at new members of the board of directors.
Yeah, and I was going to make that plug, that any of you who don't live in Andy's district, when the elections come up for EdMud board members, you want to look very carefully, because unless there's more board members who understand these issues and are really going to be advocates for it, we'll have business as usual.
Well, when it comes to conservation, we're a very well-run agency, and a lot of our conservation programs have been looked to as a model and have been parroted by water agencies all over the state. So I'm very proud of that, and that's why I'm excited about looking into community choice for maximizing our energy efficiency opportunities for our community.
I think we have time for one more question. Go ahead.
First of all, Nancy, as a bike advocate, thank you so much for making Berkeley more bike friendly. It's just really a wonderful model, not only regionally but nationally. So thank you for all your hard work on that. I was just thinking about it. I want to have you talk just for a second more about the community choice for energy, and that whole program, because as we go to more plug-ins and more electrical vehicles, I mean, half of electricity is coming from coal. So
Not in California.
but nationally, so
Certainly.
as nationally as we're going to electric vehicles, is that really the solution? So if you could kind of address that, but also talk a little bit more about community choice for.
Sure. From a technological perspective, there's still a benefit to having our vehicle transportation coming from electric sources as opposed to oil. There's still a benefit there, and especially as we approach more indications of grid parity with solar, as we have more wind development opportunities all around the country, there is still a very significant benefit to having more electrified vehicle transportation. Assuming, of course, that we're encouraging our federal government to invest in new starts of rail transportation.
Not really the solution. So if you could kind of address that, but also talk a little bit more about community choice for.
Sure. From a technological perspective, there's still a benefit to having our vehicle transportation coming from electric sources as opposed to oil. There's still a benefit there, and especially as we approach more indications of grid parity with solar, as we have more wind development opportunities all around the country, there is still a very significant benefit to having more electrified vehicle transportation. Assuming, of course, that we're encouraging our federal government to invest in new starts of
Gloria Steinem has a great quote about SF State saying that, if you want to see a university that looks like the world, go to San Francisco State. So I should, and I also teach in a college of business and have always taught in the colleges of business and management schools, but I teach in a college of business that actually has social justice in its mission statement, so I think that makes it somewhat unusual. I also wanted to mention, you think this is not relevant, but I was born in Ireland, grew up in the UK, and I only mention this partly because I like the 6.9% chant, but we don't do chants, the culture way. It's just one of these things. The other thing is we're not very good at inspiring stories either, so I apologize in advance for the downbeat nature of the presentation. But so the two things I really wanted to talk about very quickly are union structure and finding new structures are relevant to the new economy, and then the broader question about how to redefine the debate on labour rights. Now, of course, in the first point, first very obvious thing is that the labour movement has not always looked like the way that it does at the moment. I mean, sometimes we assume that unions have always been the way that they currently are, with the emphasis on job security and on work rules and on seniority, etc. But of course, that's not always the case, and there's plenty of examples from the historical literature that present alternative models, and if you read things like Sue Cobble's wonderful book on waitresses unions and so forth, it presents much interesting alternative models, maybe not unlike the freelancer case. The current labour movement and the law is very much a product of a different era, the era where people worked in large workplaces for extended periods of time, and employers had very well developed internal labour markets and so forth. We do have a few examples, some of which have been mentioned, about how the existing labour movement can relate to the new economy or to this new emerging workforce. People are probably familiar with examples about the car wash workers in LA who've affiliated with the steel workers and who recently signed their first collective bargaining agreements, or as Jay mentioned, about the domestic workers and the struggle for domestic workers' Bill of Rights, both in California, in New York, and internationally at the ILO and so forth, and cases of taxi drivers, of port truckers and so forth. And these are wonderful stories, and they will, in many cases transform the lives, hopefully, of the workers involved. But unfortunately, they're very much around the periphery. And this is not in any way to dismiss their significance, but, to take the example of car wash workers, well, no one outside of LA understands the importance of that, because nowhere else other than Southern California are car wash workers, of any importance whatsoever. So, it needs to go beyond that, and certainly, unions can provide services and job training and educational qualifications and all the rest of it, and this, again, is to be encouraged, and it's something that I think is very good development. But, unions aren't MBA programs. I mean, I teach on MBA programs, I kind of understand that, so it has to be some sort of collective impulse that's at the center of what we do. And I really don't think that it's possible to reverse the 6.9% private sector density unless there's some way we can redefine the debate in this country over labour rights. Jay cited, when he was corresponding with us, the example of the Berkeley Bowl, and the very fact that you can have an employer like the Berkeley Bowl in a place like Berkeley engage in the most vicious anti-union practices that really make it indistinguishable from Walmart, and there's almost no story there. Tells us a great deal about the very, very sorry state about the debate of labour rights in the United States. And so how are we going to redefine that debate? Well, I mean, unfortunately, I don't think it's going to happen through the AFL-CIO or through the existing unions. I mean, we have 1 minute. There are many wonderful people in these organizations, and this is not, many of them close friends, but they're too concerned with process, they're too concerned with the internal politics of the organizations, and they've been too successfully demonized by the anti-union right and by the conservatives in this country. So it's unlikely also to come through, the George Millers or Sherrod Browns of this world. I mean, even although they've done many wonderful things, it can't be an inside the belt way. initiative, it has to come from some organization, maybe at the local level, at the state level, that's not beholden to the existing labour movement, to any particular union, that's not sort of tarnished in the same way that they are. I don't know if it's like Human Rights Watch, if it's some kind of local organization that just takes it on as their cause, saying, we believe in labour rights, we believe in this cause, and this is something that we're going to make our issue in a very prominent way. And if you look at what's happening over the story about Apple at the moment, I think it's sort of quite instructive in some ways. I mean, who knows, this might all be some sort of just short-term media interest, but hopefully not. I mean, hopefully that we can expand this into some sort of broader debate about the state of labour rights, not just internationally, not just about US companies or exploiting weak regulation and low-cost labour in other countries, but also extend it to a debate over the state of labour rights in this country. And one final thought. Unfortunately, though, I think the reality is that in the very short term, what we face is not the inspiring stories, not about how to redefine the debate, but more existential threats. And I really think this is, I mean, the Maldives, analogy. Even in California, we have a ballot initiative in November, this sort of completely fraudulent thing about sort of stop special interest money in politics. I noticed there's another panel on campaign finance reform, which is really about preventing unions from engaging in the political process. So it's not just in Wisconsin. If someone disagrees with me, I'd be happy to debate it with you. It's not just Ohio, it's not just Indiana. I mean, these are really very, very serious threats that we're sort of facing throughout the country.
Thank you, John. Next is Carrie Ann Steele. I apologize, I have a bad cold and I kind of blanked out. But Carrie Ann Steele.
All right, well, I know who I am, so I'm not concerned. Okay. Carrie Ann Steele, labor lawyer, and while this is a relatively young panel, I think I'm the youngest on it. So I'm going to speak about young workers in the new economy. I'm 32 years old, and people in my age bracket are considered to be members of either Generation X or Generation Y. It depends on what definition is being applied. And we're also regarded as the lost generation. The lost generation is 20-something, 30-something-year-old people. And what does it mean to be a member of the lost generation? I'm going to talk about that. College are facing enormous school debt, and it's something they carry around with them for years thereafter. We also are facing high unemployment. In the age bracket of 18 to 24-year-olds, the current unemployment rate is 16.3%. If you break it out by demographic within that age group, it could be even strikingly higher in some other groups. We're delaying some major life choices because we feel financial insecurity. Major life choices such as perhaps marriage or buying a home or having children. And we also are putting off starting a quote-unquote career. Many people are dabbling a little bit here, a little bit there to make ends meet financially, but aren't really on any sort of track. And a lot of us are moving back in with our parents, or maybe we're never leaving our parents' homes. Is this familiar to anyone in the room? You got a 20-something or 30-something-year-old relative who's lived with you either currently or at some point. This is very, very common. And we're going to have many different jobs in our lifetimes. We're going to have many different careers. So there's not this same one track throughout our lives as there might have been in the past. And increasingly, we work as independent contractors. This is because of the external economic situation, but sometimes we prefer that. We say we like the flexibility of that. So what does that mean for organized labor? Well, in January, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics released a stat that between 2010 and 2011, there are 15,000 new union members between the ages of 16 to 24. Is that enough? Is that an impressive statistic? I don't think so, personally. So how do we inform young people that unions exist? How do we inform them that unions are not a relic of the old economy? And how do we convey the message, and this is a message I believe in very strongly, that unions are the most effective vehicle for countering or challenging corporate greed? And how do we involve young people in the labor movement? So I'm going to humbly suggest 4 different avenues. These are short-term goals, and if anyone else has other suggestions that are in addition or different, please do shout them out later in our session. But first, I think that unions need to continue to be, and perhaps be more so than they are currently, very visible in their support of legislation that is in the interest of young people. Legislation geared at job creation, funding for vocational training, perhaps school loan forgiveness. And just a side note before I move on to the second suggestion, there have been times recently, very recently, where organized labor and young people's groups have come head to head on legislation. For example, the alphabet soup of anti-piracy legislation that's been initiated. SOPA, PIPA, ACTA, do any of these sound familiar? So the AFL-CIO and some of its affiliates have supported that legislation because they represent a lot of people who are subject to threat if copyright and trademarks are infringed upon. And then young people's groups have said, wait a second, we operate in a culture where we share a lot of information. It's called found or borrowed information. We share this electronically. You're infringing upon our right of speech. And so some of you may have seen the blackouts of January 18th, 2012. Google blacked out its name all day. Wikipedia blacked out all its content all day. And a lot of young people were supportive of that. So that's just one example of how there may be a conflict. But the takeaway is that I think that labor really needs to be out there and out front in legislative efforts that support young people. Second, the AFL-CIO has initiated a campaign called Next Up. Next Up meaning young people, the next generation of leaders. And this is really to the credit of Secretary Treasurer Liz Schuler. She's 41 years old. She is the AFL-CIO's youngest person ever to hold the second highest position in that organization. And so they have initiated a Young Workers Summit. It's an annual conference where they pull together young union member leaders and ask them to serve as delegates and speak on behalf of their age group. And out of that has developed the Young Worker Advisory Council, and that's supposed to be an ongoing, year-long, multi-year-long effort to try to address issues of young people. And I think that those efforts should be fairly successful because I think for the most part, people of our generation believe that they're entitled to have a seat at the table with management and have a voice in government. So I think that there should be some very qualified and eager young leaders among our group. Next, unions need to continue to, and perhaps use more, social media. Facebook, it just announced it hit 845 million users. If it were a country, it would be the 3rd most populated in the entire world. We need to use Twitter, we need to use YouTube. For example, we need to convey to young people that our movement is fun and interesting. I can think of one YouTube posting that has stuck in my mind, which was the flash mob of the Westin in San Francisco, where everyone was dancing and there was a band playing to a Lady Gaga remake, and it was talking about how the hotel was a bad employer. And that went viral. That's a term which means it goes throughout the internet. It was very popular. It got a lot of hits. These are things we need to do to invite people into our movement and make it seem fun. How many of you were involved in the, say, November 2nd day of general strike or day of action? Okay. It had a festive feel until the sun went down. It had a festive feel, right? That's the feeling we want to convey about the labor movement. It's fun. It's something you want to be a part of. And last, I think that we need to continue to engage in progressive efforts to challenge economic inequality. So continue to engage in efforts like the Occupy movement. We may have some different ideas regarding strategy, but this may be the first time that we are able to show young people in that movement that we care about more than just self-preservation. And it may be the first time that young people in that movement get to ever have any firsthand contact with unions and union members. So those are just my 4 humble suggestions. And
Thank you. So now we can have, I think we have a brother and a sister from the ILWU who want to say a few words to us. And to everybody, presenters and people here, I apologize for the lack of time to take on these different issues. We're going to hear a few words here. If we have, we might be able to talk to some. We've been more discussions out in the hallway or outside with any of these illustrious men, feel free to do so.
Hola, buenos días a todos. Hola, mi nombre es María León.
My name is Maria Leon,
Y trabajo para la compañía Waste Management.
and I work for the company Waste Management.
Mi trabajo consiste en separar el material que es reciclable,
My job consists of separating the recyclable material,
como es plástico, aluminio, cartón y papel,
the plastic, aluminum, paper, and cardboard.
y estoy el día de hoy aquí para compartir un poco con ustedes acerca de lo que es mi trabajo.
Yeah, I'm here today just to share a little bit about what my work entails to you guys.
En algunas ocasiones llega el material, llega material un poco peligroso porque trabajamos también con asbesto, jeringas y tóxicos, con químicos.
So she's saying like sometimes the work is very dangerous because sometimes you're handling asbestos, you're handling chemicals, you're handling syringes that come into the recycling, like have to take care when you're doing that.
Como comunidad creo que es bueno que estén conscientes de lo que es el trabajo porque alguna vez solamente nos concretamos en pagar el bill y sacar lo que es común llamarle basura.
As a community, it's good for people to know what the work actually entails because it's really easy for us to just pay the bill, put the garbage out, and forget about it, and forget that there's people who have to handle it.
Pero la verdad es que no sabemos realmente cuál es qué fin tiene la basura que dejamos, usamos.
And many times we don't know what the actual end of the trash we throw out actually is.
Estoy muy contenta de trabajar para esta compañía y de que se preocupe por el bien del planeta y el reciclar. No me avergüenzo de trabajar para esta compañía haciendo lo que hago, pero la verdad que sí me gustaría que tomaran un poquito más de conciencia de la compañía para la que trabajo y que pensara como seres humanos que somos y que pensara un poquito más en sus trabajadores. Muchas gracias por su tiempo y que tengan un buen día.
And I'm not ashamed of the work that I do. I actually like the work that I do. But I would like to make sure that the company also have the consciousness that we are human beings and we do need to have respect and a livable wage so we can take care of our families. Thank you.
We ships it out to the Altamont landfill, and the clerical workers have been working on an expired contract for over 2 years. The landfill has been on an expired contract for over a year. The recycle workers are on an expired contract for over 6 months now. And so we know in 2007, Waste Management locked out the workers, the Teamsters, and put the machinists and the ILW out on the street also. And we just think it's very important that when we look at, when we talk about sustainability, we look at what really the companies that come in and do the work in our community. We talk about local jobs. Let's talk about employers being responsible to the local community. And this is really critical. We know there are a lot of good employers, and a bunch of them are in the recycling industry. And a lot of local employers that are in the recycling industry. And we need to hold those that come from outside of our community accountable to the same kind of standards that we want for all of us. Thank you.
Well, so unfortunately, I think we're out of time. I want to thank everybody, but I want to make 2 points. One is, I think what the brother just last said is a very, very important thing. The sustainability movement talks a lot about transparency, about understanding systemic risk, about understanding where different things come from, the problems, environmentally. And I think one of the ways that the union movement can hook up with the popular kind of zeitgeist is to talk about that type of thing, because we have a story to tell about that. And the second is that for all the problems that unions have, and we got a ton, there is no alternative at this point to workers coming together. And the only way that working people have ever had power is in unity. The form I became the president of the East Bay Express, but I'm also a union lawyer. still represent some unions, although I do much more writing and working with the newspaper, and we've got an exciting newspaper now in terms of the things that we're doing. So we have the descriptions of most of our presenters are in your program, so I'm not going to say much more, except two of them are not. One, Andreas Kluver is with us. I'm very excited. He's the Secretary-Treasurer of Alameda County Building Trades. Andreas worked as the AFL-CIO rep in Southern Africa for a number of years, helping to organize textile, garment, metal, and security workers. He's worked as a compliance officer enforcing prevailing wage issues, worked for a community nonprofit, City of Oakland, and he has a master's from Cal here as well. That is the form that unions have been historically organized into over the last at least 90 or 100 years. Are they still the forms for today? Certainly the AFL-CIO has tried a number of approaches, associate membership, this type of thing. And we have workers in categories that aren't able to get union rights, like the court workers at the Port of Oakland, who are considered to be independent contractors, and they come together as an antitrust right. Or domestic workers. There was a meeting in Sacramento recently to try to get more rights for domestic workers. And we have a number of these things too. And then we're going to close our program with just a little bit. We've got some brothers and sisters here who are involved in the struggle, and they're going to talk to us a little bit here at the end. And you really shouldn't have a discussion period where you talk about workers' issues without having some of that being as well. But they'll probably be at the end. So if y'all want to have a seat right now, it might be good. So I think we'll start with Carl. Over here? That'd be good.
If you can be there, but won't use the microphone.
This would be because I just thought over here, driving over here, I'd come up with a new chant or try out, see what you think. We are the 6.9%. What do you think? Got a nice ring to it. You know, 6.9% being the private sector union percentage of the workforce. It's a little bit lower than it used to be. At one point, I think it was more like 35%. And I think the soft coal industry is well over 50%. You know, public sector is still pretty high. But I think it's fair to say that in some industries, mine included, publications, communications, we've been rubbed out, except for a few islands, which I compared to the Maldives. I was also trying to figure out, you know, what do you call somebody from the Maldives? Maldivian? Or, I just don't know. I'd like to be educated. Does somebody know? Maybe what is it? Maldivian? Sounds like some kind of a gluten allergy thing. If you follow what's going on in the Maldives, you know they're threatened by rising tides and rising ocean levels, and global warming is pretty much going to cover over the Maldives. And the former president or prime minister or somebody of the Maldives, to dramatize this issue, held a cabinet meeting in scuba gear underwater. And as a result of that, the military in the Maldives bumped him off and sort of staged what the guy considers a coup. I think they have a different way of phrasing it. I think that's a good metaphor for the predicament we're in. We, in the labor movement, cling very tightly to the islands we have left, and we fight for that and proud of it. Try to do the best we can to save the islands that are left. But if we don't respond to the global problem that's overwhelming us, as captured by that statistic, we're done. And organized labor, in my view, is the only remaining legitimate force for working class advancement in this country. It's not the Democratic Party or MoveOn.org or any other organization that really represents working class interests with the kind of power that the labor movement can muster at its best. So, how to do that? I think it requires the unions to stop, or let's not just speak for myself, not the other unions here. They have their own, I know they have their own ideas about everything. In our case, we have kind of tried to set aside the finger pointing and the whining and start looking at ourselves. I'm a fan of a lot of rock and roll bands, including a band called Tool. They have this, I think these are all adults here, I can use a bit of language. There's a song that basically talks about a kid who accuses the mayor in the band, the singer, of selling out, and the singer of the song basically says, you know, before you point your finger at me, point your finger at yourself, and just stick your fucking finger up your ass. And I always kind of, you know, I have to remember that, you know, who am I accusing of here of doing what to me, and what does that get me? So we have sort of analyzed our internal structures and tried to figure out why is it so difficult to organize workers in our industry. There's certainly a lot of them who need organizing. One answer is that it's very difficult to get into a union. It's really hard. If you go to a union's website, I want to join that union. I dare you to do this. Just pick any union. Can you go to their website and send them some money or something and join? Mostly not. We couldn't do that in the Guild until last year. We started a new unit, which is the main point I wanted to make here in my 5 minutes. By the way, somebody give me the hook.
Yeah.
Give me a minute warning, okay?
You got 2.5 minutes.
2.5 minutes left, where we can go into great detail in 2.5 minutes. We started a freelance unit. You can go online, and if nothing else, hopefully you'll remember this URL or just Google it. I think it comes up on Google as they've schemed against us. It's called guildfreelancers.org. Guild Freelancers being the shorthand name for the freelance unit of the Pacific Media Workers Guild. I'm the executive officer of the Pacific Media Workers Guild. The freelance unit is the only freelance organization, freelance union, workers union, sponsored by a guild local in the country. We've been trying to get others started around the country with no luck so far. You can go online to that website and join right now. If you're a journalist, a writer, a poet, an artist, a photographer, somebody that does website development that presents information, fact-based, we're mostly fact-based journalism kind of thing, but we're not against poets and some of our, creative people, fiction writers and so forth. That's not our main thing, but we don't hold anything against anybody by way of craft division. If you want to join, you can join. Just click, there's PayPal. It's very easy. It's $12 a month is the dues. You get discounted dental and vision plans, and you get a press pass. Cat Anderson in the front has one. It's kind of cool. It's got a bunch of colors. It looks kind of official. Some bullshit on the back that the police can't read quickly, but it looks official, so they let it go on through. It's kind of useful. I'm not sure it's worth $12 a month, to tell you the truth, but it's worth something. I think the one point I make in my allotted time is that unions have to re-examine their structures and make it easier for people to join. Because if we do not, if we only focus on the island sinking, flooding, the old line holdout entities that are still union, we're screwed. Because that ain't where the action is. We have to do a good job for those units, and we have to represent them well, but we also have to somehow reconnect with the broader public. If I had 2.5 minutes, beyond the 2.5, but now I've probably 30 seconds left, I start talking about the occupation movement and how we need to reconnect with our history. I'm reading a book called The History of the American Working Class, which covers the period from just before the First World War up until Roosevelt. And there's some very interesting insights there about the great compromises made by the AFL and Sam Gompers, and how the mine workers and the radical elements were defeated. And I think the message there, is that the American labor movement needs to reconnect with its militant past and somehow figure out a better way to connect to the unorganized. Now, one last point. I get 15 seconds, I'm done. The new economy, the people who are progressive-minded, the owners, need a union as much as anybody else. And I honor the ILWU brothers here and sisters, or is everybody brothers and sisters? We represent the staff at the ILWU. We're proud of that role. The Guild represents a lot of union staffs. We represent the staff of AFSCME 3299 and the staff of the California Labor Federation. Even the unions need unions. Thanks very much. 5 minutes, right? Was that 5 or 8?
Just perfect.
Was that 5 or 8?
You were just fine.
If I was only 5, I get 3 more.
Okay. Can everybody hear me through this mic here?
Yeah.
Okay. Again, name's Andreas Kluver, Secretary Treasurer, Alameda County Building Trades Council. And just to kind of piggyback on, but I think that, ironically, I think representing the building trades, I think after Carl's comments in terms of where he mentioned an island, I think we're probably the union sector that is probably most conservative, most accused of probably being on an island, because we've changed very little, I think, the last 50 years. And I think we've changed very little for one reason, that we've been very, very successful. And I think, in a way, victims of our success in terms of, I think we've got the members that we represent, I think, in terms of for non-professional or blue collars, traditional trades, I think we get some of the highest salaries, some of the best benefits packages, some real impacts on the workforce. I think we've been very successful in that. Where we have not been successful, and where we've lost a lot, is obviously in terms of the market share we represent, and certain sectors within our industry that we've given up completely. For example, residential. And we really have struggled with how do we get back and how do we grow again. I think we really need to put some real thinking into that. Having said that, though, I think we've done a very good job of representing the non-represented in the construction industry. I think through a lot of our political influence in terms of OSHA laws and wage and hour and so forth, I think we've been able to really improve working conditions for non-represented workers. The building trades, I think, are very unique. We're very different from a lot of the other, in terms of an organizing model, a lot of the other industry sectors. We have, through the NLRA, we've got top-down organizing. We're allowed to do what's called pre-hire agreements, ADEF agreements, so we can go directly to the employer and organize that employer before anybody steps foot. And so I think it really changes, it makes us very different in terms of how we look at organizing. It really gives us some other tools we have in place. And one of those tools we've had is it's kind of like a marketing strategy in terms of where we've actually managed through, I think, very sophisticated apprenticeship programs, labor management apprenticeship programs. We have been able, in many parts of the country, to really control the training. And that control of the training has really led us to have the best qualified workers, which then we can market to the employers and say, hey, yeah, we're going to cost you a lot more, but your productivity is going to increase, and and also to the client that contractor is building for in terms of guaranteeing quality work. So, with that, also I think we've been very successful, and again, focused probably on the Bay Area in doing the politics we need to do. We're very, very involved in politics and making sure that we've got folks on local and state elected positions, people that understand our issues and are friendly to our issues, and if they don't understand them, we work very hard to get them out. So I think that that's a bit of our model. Again, I think that one of the big challenges has been how do we go out and regain what we've lost? How do we go out and organize in certain demographic and populations that are taking more and more of the work? A lot of undocumented workers, a lot of Latino workers, predominantly where the industry is going. I think that our models are starting to fall short on that. With regards to the new economy, though, however, I think that's been another trait of the trades is basically we have seen very little of new economy. I mean, I think that one of the advantages we've had, and that's managed to sustain us, is they quite haven't figured out yet how to offshore us. They will, eventually. They're going to ship in the building ready-made and just put it in place. But so far, I think we've been pretty lucky in terms of still controlling the work and keeping the work local. There have been a lot of challenges, a lot of prefab issues. I think we've got to deal with. We've got to internationalize a little more and have stronger partnerships in terms of where a lot of the prefab is going on. But I think on the whole, that's been stable. In terms of the green economy, we play along with green economy because that's the buzzword now and that's where the funding is. But in terms of green construction and regular construction, it's the same damn thing. It's exactly the same thing. Our folks have been training in, quote, green construction for years. New technologies continuously being introduced into the workplace, and our apprenticeship programs are fully adapting to that, and our contractors are able to compete and bid on that. So, the challenges of new economy is looking at an attempt to kind of to devalue the work and put in lower prevailing wage rates than union rates for a lot of photovoltaic installation, for example. But that's a challenge I think we can meet. I think what we've realized, though, is that in terms of economic, we're extremely vulnerable to the business cycle. Our folks are the first ones laid off and the last ones rehired when it comes to the economic down cycles. And this current recession has hit us extremely hard. We got looking at 30 to 40% of the membership unemployed. So we're extremely vulnerable to that. Yet, we are pretty resilient. We kind of made it through okay without losing too many people. I think that issue is one we have to grapple with in terms of the cycle. I think in terms of our strategies looking forward, in terms of what are we going to do to really continue to make ourselves relevant and to expand our base. And I think one of those, and I think that's really been happening the last 15 years, and I'm really proud to say in Alameda County we're kind of the leaders of that, if not in California, in the country, is in terms of taking a step back, looking at our membership and saying, wait a minute, this membership really does not reflect the communities that we're working in. And that's having a real negative impact on how we're perceived, and not just from an equity perspective, but also from a marketing perspective, our ability to get work and partner with public agencies to say, hey, we want you to build a union, but they come back and say, but your union members don't come from our communities, and we got to scratch our heads and say, yeah, that's actually true. So how are we going to do to change that? And I got 1 minute to wrap up. And I think that we've been very, very aggressive. And I think there's been a real change in the last 15 years in the way our unions think in terms of exclusion and inclusion. They've opened, I think, a lot more diversity to folks of color, women, in terms of trying to get them into the apprenticeship programs. We do a lot of project labor agreements in this county, both private and public. All of those project labor agreements have strong local higher language. We put a lot of effort into that. So I think that is really an area I think that we've done well in. The area we have not done well in, I think, is really come in with new strategies to really organize membership. I think the whole issue brought up by the brother around, what does it constitute to be a member? It's very difficult to get into the building trades. And those barriers to entry need to be addressed if we want to expand. So I think there's a lot of challenges. So I guess my time's up. Thank you.
Thank you. John?
I'll also sit here if that's okay. Just two things very quickly.
Things that we have done is presented at the General Assembly, and Occupy had approved, supported, and now it is in the website of Occupy, inviting other occupiers to also model the gift card that Oakland Grown had launched, and move on with the sustainability of our communities. I am also part of the Sustainable Business Alliance, which is part of Occupied. We have organizations nationwide, the American Amoeba, and there are two organizations that do policy issues at the sustainable with sustainable issues, and they are working not directly with Occupied, I would say, but because Occupied had supported Oakland Grown, in an indirect way, we are also working together. I don't know how it's in other cities because I can only work with as a local business. I am really involved in the local economy, so I can't speak for Berkeley or Walnut Creek, but in Oakland, the sustainability issue is our priority.
I wonder if you can talk about General Assemblies. I wonder how many people here have actually been to a General Assembly. Are they still meeting, and where and when? Sarah?
As the secretary of yes, we're having one today, 2 o'clock, 19th and Telegraph, and that's Oakland's General Assembly. I can't speak for the other occupiers in the Bay Area, but I've got so much love for Oakland's GA because we do get folks from all over the Bay Area. People are really showing up and coming out, and the General Assembly is only one of the tools. I personally don't like to fetishize it, even though I do have a heart for it. But it's only one of the tools, and what it's really functioning as right now in our community is just a meeting place for all of the different affinity groups to kind of come together and say, hey, what are you doing? What are you doing? This is what we're doing. This is what we're doing. And the kitchen committee always shows up with lunch, which is phenomenal. But I will say it's a really good plug-in point. If you haven't been to one before, it's a really good opportunity to kind of come down and say, hey, I'm Joe or I'm Tim, and how can I get involved?
Sarah does a great job when she facilitates of keeping everyone in line.
Occupy SF still has General Assemblies. They're meeting at 101 Market out inside the Fed, and they do Tuesdays and Thursdays. But since we don't have a camp anymore, we don't have anything to talk about every day, so we only do it twice a week. But all the working groups still meet, generally at the Drum Street Starbucks because they love us there. They still meet almost every day. So there's still a lot going on, and the General Assemblies we've been reforming and remodeling the process because it was growing pains. You know, none of us are really experienced with direct democracy before. You know, no one tells you have to get your hands dirty. You know, everyone thinks you're going to walk in and it's just going to be this cakewalk and we're going to vote and feel amazing, but you know, that's why the word stakeholder in consensus process is important, because you've got a stake in the decision, so there's a lot of emotions, and that's one thing. If you're going to come to a General Assembly for your first time, you know, just kind of keep in mind it's going to seem like everybody's hating each other and arguing, but it's not. It's just a passionate form of debate. But yeah, the General Assemblies are still going on, and even we don't, it's more like a meeting spot. The working groups check in San Francisco as well, and we consent on different things. A lot of, the issue we're having in San Francisco, I don't know if others are having it, but apparently every activist group now thinks they need our stamp of approval in order to protest, so they all come to us and it's just like, no, as I was saying earlier, you know, keep doing what you've been doing, you know, it's been working, you know, come to us and tell us what's happening and we can bring numbers, but General Assemblies are, I don't know, they're changing, they're interesting. It's interesting to see where they're gonna go from here.
So, a little while ago, I know you talked about like all the negative stuff, and you know, like I'm sure everyone here has heard about that. Can you guys briefly talk about some of the good that maybe we're not seeing on the news or in the newspaper and stuff for those of us that aren't super involved with the movement?
I don't know if you would perceive these things as good. I can just tell you what's been happening in the last week. There is upcoming, tomorrow is going to be a National Day of Occupy the Food System. A lot of food justice groups getting involved in that, and they've been meeting very consistently over the past couple months. No one talks about them. People have been protesting banks directly, going and protesting banks. People have been shutting down foreclosure auctions on the steps of the Alameda County Courthouse and getting arrested. Nobody talks about them. People are defending foreclosures and trying to get people to actually get back inside their houses. Also not in the news. That's just for Occupy though. I think that there's a whole lot going on. I think that the food justice stuff is actually really, really interesting because there are also a lot of the people that are involved in Occupy the Food System locally are also working with other nonprofits and other local groups around food justice. They're already plugged into those issues within the community already, and then they're bringing that stuff to Occupy, which I think is very, very interesting and something that I don't think the public generally perceives Occupy to be doing.
Thank you for that excellent question. I want to refer people to that Occupy stands against the starvation of our people, the losing our homes, and the violence of this society is what Occupy is standing up against, and that is far more problematic, of course, than the minimal vandalism that the 1% of occupiers who engage in vandalism, and property damage is not violence. Come on. So anyway, in Rebecca Solnit's article, she lists some recent victories, and those are what we need to be talking about. How the campaign against corporate personhood is gaining momentum, and there was Occupy the Courts on January 20th.
That you really can't disregard just like the personal transformations that people are having.
I'd love to just hear your perspectives on sustainability. What does the future look like in very direct action? Do we go more in changing policy, working within the government, getting ourselves elected, or to stay on the outside? Where do we go, let's say, within the next year for specific work through Occupy, using that as the vehicle locally and nationally? How do we sustain ourselves around this movement?
The beauty of Occupy is the diversity. And so some people within and without Occupy will go towards a more reformist, working to change legislation and to elect better people. And I think most people in Occupy are probably not that interested in electoral politics and will be working outside of that system, and it's all good. We need it all.
As a member of the small locally owned business community in Oakland, I am part of a few organizations that are focused in sustainability, in local currency, in supporting the local economy, the local growers. Oakland Grown had lunch at the end of last year. Oakland Grown is an organization I am part of. I am in the steering committee, and it's an organization that supports indie businesses. We had launched our first project, the gift cards, and what the gift cards.
What I see as the real thing that Occupy has accomplished so far, which is changing the conversation nationally and locally, especially. There's a huge breadth within the Occupy movement of what I see as, I guess, the spectrum of people who want to tax the rich and people who want to eat the rich. Reformers and revolutionaries and everyone in between. And so I think we've probably got quite a spectrum just on this panel. So I'm going to let everyone introduce themselves and talk about kind of your background in organizing and what you've been involved with within Occupy so far.
Hi, I'm Phoebe Sorgan, and as for my background in organizing, I've served on the KPFA board. I've been a Berkeley Peace and Justice Commissioner, and I wrote Berkeley's 2 resolutions to abolish corporate personhood, which were then copied by Richmond, California last year, passed unanimously, and Albany just earlier this month, and Marina, California. So that's spreading, and now we're working on ballot initiatives to make it even stronger. And as far as my involvement with Occupy, I started out with Occupy Freedom Plaza in DC. Last June, I signed the pledge to come to DC and be there on October 6th when that was launched. And then I also visited and went to some workshops at McPherson Square, the other Occupy DC. So that was thrilling to be a part of those first steps and ongoing. And then when I came back home, I got involved a little bit with Occupy Oakland and San Francisco. And finally, I live here in Berkeley, so finally I got involved with Occupy Berkeley in November and pretty much gave it all of my free time until that encampment was shut down. And it continues. There continue to be lots of activities and general assemblies, and there are flyers on the back table there that show some of the things that are happening, like the knit-in and the sit-in that's every week, the McDonald's action that's coming up on March 4th, and also all of the occupiers are participating in the May 1 general strike, and Earth Day actions are big with the occupiers in the East Bay. Thank you.
My name is Maria Gastelumendi. I am the owner of the Rising Loafer Cafe and Bakery that is located at the center, the heart of Franco Gawa Plaza, where Occupy had made its home. So as an immigrant, I wanted to have a life in Oakland, and I established a food service industry that could sell food that was healthy and affordable and very oriented in the conservation of the environment. So when Occupy came to my neighborhood, I was very interested in knowing who they were, and I found out that there were a lot of issues that we had commonality with. And in my fight to try to convince people about what is the difference between fast food and healthy food, that for years I was trying to send, suddenly Occupy came, and there you were, people understanding much easily what is to be supporting a local business, supporting the local currency, and I felt that they basically spoke my issues. So I made home for them, and we created a committee, the local business liaison committee, that had networked with many other committees in Occupy. And although you don't see the occupiers physically in Franco Gawa Plaza, there are lots of meetings that are going on, working on issues that the media is not too interested in publicizing. And I'm not going to repeat what Phoebe already said. These are projects that are on an ongoing basis. And I feel very empowered and very optimistic, and especially with hope that just last year I noticed people didn't have. So Occupy had brought hope to us. So with that, I will.
Hi, my name is Sarah Meisner, and I just wanted to start by saying thank you for coming here today and sharing space with us. It's really a privilege to sit in community with other folks in Berkeley and the Bay Area. So at present, I am involved with Occupy Oakland, and the way that I engage in the Occupy Oakland community is I'm on the facilitation committee. So I'm basically like a secretary to Occupy. And additionally, in addition to that work, I also engage in Occupy for Prisoners. And if you hadn't seen that or participated in it this last Monday, we had a demonstration in front of San Quentin, which was to raise awareness about the issues facing currently incarcerated peoples, and now people on parole or in detainment centers or in juvenile halls. And it was just a phenomenal demonstration. We had about 1,000 people there, and it was beautiful. One of the most diverse demonstrations that I've seen to date, being engaged in Occupy Oakland, and diversity on many different, many different indicators for diversity, not just age or race or gender, but also socioeconomic class, immigrants. So it was a really exciting day. The historical experiences that I have that led me to the work that I'm doing now include a lifetime of service. I've been engaged in service and activism since my mom says I was like 3 years old. And which wasn't easy for them, right? And but I do have what I like to call like my dirty little secret in the Bay Area, which is I worked as a Republican campaigner and fundraiser for about 4 years of my life. And I worked on Bill Jones' gubernatorial campaign, and I worked for fundraising firm in Sacramento, Wendy Warfield and Associates. And I worked fundraising for George W. And then I came out to the Bay Area. Oh, actually, I should say that those experiences are the experiences that radicalized me. Because I actually was sort of seen as this like apprentice and was invited into all of these meetings and got to see how money and the elite are running our country, and was just completely brokenhearted by that. So I had the privilege of going to school at UC Berkeley and having a Peace and Service Fellowship and engaging in many different forms of service in the Bay Area. And I just, as part of my introduction, I have to say that I think the most beautiful part about Occupy that I've seen thus far is that we can carry our political beliefs, our political ideologies, and the minute that you carry those into community, they are forced to change, and you are forced to change. And it's not always comfortable, but there are beautiful transformations that are occurring in our communities, and that's what I'm most excited about.
Hey everybody, my name's Scott. I'm from Occupy SF. Forgive me, I woke up with OccuCough this morning, so I'm a little gonna be having cough drops throughout the session. I always joke that I'm here from the internet because I was always into cyber activism. There was never really a community I felt that I could plug into that would kind of fit all the things I'm passionate about. And then one day last July, I saw that poster that was Adbusters was floating around with the ballerina on the Wall Street Bulls